Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about a recent case in the United States where a district court, an activist, some leftist flunky activist judge, of which there are now very many in the United States, made an injunction or an order against the executive order of the president that said if you want to vote in a United States election, you have to prove citizenship. And this was a very serious concern, given that it's estimated many millions of illegals, whether it be visa overstays or illegals pouring in through the southern border or whatever, a lot of these illegals are voting. And that given the rigor of maintaining the voting rolls is so poor in so many areas, particularly the Democrat areas, that there are tens of millions of illegals voting, or people voting 2 or 3 times, and this sort of thing. So proof of identity and citizenship when you vote is very reasonable. Most countries have that, and I can't see what the problem is. But when the president issued that executive order, the screams and the cries were, this is voter suppression, and this is the work of Nazis and Hitler and swastika and the normal stuff, racism. They just trot out every time and something they don't like occurs. But I couldn't see the problem with it. If you want to vote in a US election, then you should be an American. And how that can be controversial is quite beyond me. Nonetheless, the screaming and the carrying on just was never ending. But recently, in the last few days, a district court judge issued this order saying that, I won't get into the weeds of it, but the essential argument was rather a technical one, saying that the president didn't have the authority to issue that order, rather than argue against the idea of illegals voting in elections. So the claim by the judge was that it's the area of the purview of either the Congress of the United States or the individual states to make up their own rules and policies and procedures in terms of voting. So now I do accept some elements of the technicality of that argument, by the way. So I assumed that the lawsuit had been brought by people who were the serious professors of constitutional law society or something like that, because given the technicality of that argument, I assumed that it was legally based, from legal academics and legal experts who were examining the minutiae and the weeds of the Constitution and its meaning. So, okay, well, it's a pretty technical sort of argument. And again, they weren't arguing for or against could illegals vote or not. It was just the sheer technicality, is this an order that the president has the authority to make? Now, I would argue in return, is this an authority that the president have? Can this be determined or challenged by a district court judge? I would argue that's a no. I don't believe the district court judge has that authority to impose a national ban on the president while saying that states can make up their mind or the Congress can do this. Then clearly the judge is overstepping their authority. And the authority of these judges, the district court judges, do they have federal, as in national authority or national reach of their, that really needs to be looked at carefully. But the most important thing I think in this is that activist judges must declare their activism. And if they have even a whiff of activism in relation to President Trump or these sort of policies or illegal alien groups or something like that, they must stand down. They must stand down from that case and cannot hear it if there is a whiff of conflict of interest, which in this judge's case, it's not just a whiff, it's a screaming noise of conflict of interest. Nonetheless, let's come back to the point here. So who brought this lawsuit? And this is the bit that shocked me. My jaw almost hit the floor when I saw it. The two primary movers in this, who would have been funded by like Soros or somebody, the two primary movers in this were some Latinos in America activist group, and they're very clear. Their colours are really put to the mast on this. They support illegal aliens in the United States being allowed to stay and being given citizenship. So they represent, and by their declaration at least, Latino interests and only Latino interests, and the right of illegals to come into and stay in the United States. So we're hardly talking about like why would any judge worth a thin dime, accept a law case or a legal case from a group like that? Fuck. I mean, that's not an activist dance macabre going on there with that group and the judge. So I thought, all right, well, maybe there's some more serious plaintiffs here, So I had to look at the litigants, more serious litigants here. So the next one was some feminist activist lesbian group, as I understand it. At least that was my interpretation. So they're acting on behalf of brown lesbians or something like that. I still couldn't get my head around that one. So this is it. So these are the two groups that come, they're working in concert. So clearly it's an activist bit of bullshit here. But they decided to get together to do a law case against the president of the United States and his judge. Oh yeah, I'll hear that. Now you imagine you're a sober judge just looking at the law, and these two brazenly activist groups come to you and say, look, we just want to stop the president. We Democrats, we can't win elections without mass scale voter fraud. So we need to stop the president's, the effect of the president's executive order. Now, this hardly matters because there's an appeals court, and then there's, of course, the Supreme Court of the United States. And one of those will grant the authority of I believe, will grant the authority of the president to make such an order. The president of the United States can make I believe, does have the authority to issue an executive order regarding voter integrity in at least this context. So I don't think that'll be disputed in the end. Nonetheless, if you're the litigants, you also are aware of that. They know that they're probably going to be overturned. So this is a symbolic gesture of, we're fighting fascism. It's that sort of thing. And I think they're going through just symbolic optical pyrotechnics in this case, and feeling that we're fighting back, we're fighting the force of the fascism. So now let's just have a look at the voting thing. Now, in the 2020 presidential election, we had a candidate in Joe Biden the Democrats had a candidate in Joe Biden who was could barely utter a sentence without stumbling over it and mumbling his way through it. Sure, he was coherent from time to time, but they had to, inject him full of whatever and juice him up with whatever it was. And I'm surprised that, when they went through that presidential debate for the 2020 election, I was surprised that Biden lasted. There were times where he was, actually coherent. Now he came out with a lot of nonsense, but that doesn't matter. I'm surprised he even managed to get the sentences out there. Now he's getting a lot of help. The moderators were running interference for him, and they were, disrupting Trump when he was talking. They were protecting Biden when he was talking. So he was getting a lot of help, but nonetheless, he did better than I thought he would, given how, if you looked at the raw footage of the very few sort of press conferences and things like that he'd done, again, he struggled to even get to the end of the sentence in most of them, and clearly was a guy in serious mental and physical decline, clearly, or mental decline in particular. And so he's a guy who in that campaign or that presidential election, he didn't campaign. He had a few public appearances in a parking lot outside of the place where they had him holed up in the basement. The rest was all done by his handlers and his flunkies. Now, the media was 100% on his side, so he had that. So he didn't campaign. He could barely get a sentence out. And yet somehow we're supposed to believe that Joe Biden has been the most popular president, but by number of votes, the most popular president ever in the history of the United States, not just by the largest number of votes, but by the largest proportion of votes of eligible voters. So he breaks two records. So this guy who didn't campaign, can barely get a sentence out, is the most popular president of all time, and by a country mile. I mean, it's not like he's most popular by a handful of votes. He's the most popular at the time. He's the most popular by 12.5 million votes. 12.5 million votes. He's the most popular. So fuck is that guy popular? Now, when we look at the number of illegals that are supposed to be voting, and we look at the various chicanery that goes on with voting, in terms of validating the chain of custody of ballot boxes being moved from one location to another until they get to the final counting centre. They're meant to be signed off. Two people sign them over to the other two people, then move them to the next location, and so on. That chain of custody was broken in that 2020 election to the tune of 10 plus million votes. And when you look at other practices such as the election drop boxes and all sorts of stuff, the postal ballots and one person could vote 10 times, all this sort of craziness. The election the quality controls, if you like, of the election process were close to non-existent. Now, since it's come to light that there could well over 10 million illegal aliens are voting in US elections, and I'm talking not just like local councils or something, but federal elections, for the Senate, for the presidency, Congress, and so on. So this is a lot of votes that are illegal. These people shouldn't be voting. They're not citizens. They're not Americans. So there's a huge need to clean up the voter rolls. But if you sort of calculate the numbers, I mean, look at Kamala Harris, for example. What a weak candidate she was. I mean, she was a fucking moron, and yet she is. Wait for this. I mean, you need to sit down because you're going to need to. She is the fourth most popular presidential candidate in history. So Biden was number one, and Kamala was number four. The fourth most popular candidate in American presidential election history, Kamala Harris, for Christ's sakes. Now, at this stage, the globalists, the Democrat globalists, had lost control of. They had total control over some of these voting processes, which they'd lost since the Biden election. So, but nonetheless, they still were able to stump up something in the order of, give or take, 13 to 14 million votes. And in Biden's case, they managed to vaporize into existence some in the order of 22 million votes, give or take. So now, if they'd had the same control over the voting mechanisms and practices that they had in Biden, they'd have got Kamala across the line. She'd have won by 4 or 5 million votes. They'd have handed her that one, but they just didn't have control of that, and they didn't have total control over the media machine, with Elon Musk buying Twitter and that sort of stuff. So it was only their inability to cheat that denied them, stopped them, prevented them from getting Kamala over the line. So there's a huge need to clean up the voter rolls. But as you can imagine, the globalists look at the globalists thing here in Ireland, for example, where there's huge pushback against mass migration, but somehow a globalist, mass migration, pro-mass migration candidate wins. in the Irish election. I mean, did that really happen? I don't think so. In Holland, where there's been huge pushback against mass migration and all the stuff that goes with it, huge pushback, but somehow the pro mass migration candidate does really, really well in that election. I just don't believe it. And we need to, if the US election in 2020 proved anything, it shows that the globalists, if they can't undermine democracy by controlling all the candidates that are standing for election, they'll undermine it by rigging the election. And they have no qualms at all about doing that. And the 2020 election of Biden clearly illustrated that. And they rigged the elections for the Senate as well, so they could stack the courts with activist judges and so on, given that the Senate approves the judges. But so cleaning up the electoral rolls is of paramount importance. But the globalists, the Democrat-controlled globalists and their stooges and flunkies and hangers-on, they know that if the voter rolls are cleaned up, it'll be very hard for them to win elections by rigging. They're going to have to win elections by having the policies that make people want to vote for them, and that's something they don't want. They can't win on policies. They can win on rigging or calling everyone else a Nazi or something. That they can hopefully get them by, but they can't win on policies, and they know it. So with President Trump cleaning up the voter rolls and say, hey, you've got to be a citizen if you want to vote, if that gets to be put into law, and I think it will be, again, not today or tomorrow, but soon, then the position of the Democrats is very poor. Now, the Democrats are already looking at the midterm elections and hoping like hell they can stack and rig that election so they control the House of Representatives in the United States. And if they don't win the House in the midterm, and they're very much hoping that they can, if they don't win the House in the midterm, or if the position in the Senate even deteriorates further, like they lose another senator, then they're in a lot of trouble. And when the next presidential election cycle comes around, they probably won't be in a better position then. So they have to fight this executive order. It's only through vote rigging that they can, and again, illegal aliens being a key part of this, that they can win elections, and they know that. And so they're doing what they can to, stop and obstruct President Trump's executive order. I don't think it'll be successful. I think their strategy at this point is just to try and delay it enough, so fob it off, try and kick that can down the road enough so they can get the midterm elections out the way. And I think that's at the moment their strategy. But hopefully that presidential order will prevail, and that only citizens can vote in the election. If that is the case, I don't think the Democrats will do very well in the midterms. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.